it turns out now more than 200,000 people, just Florida residents alone, got out of line because they just couldn't wait anymore on Election Day.
This has been a strategy to suppress the participation of working class people, of senior citizens, of students who tend to vote for the Democrats by making it unbearable. And you can travel around as I do, different cities, and on the wealthy side of town, the lines are moving. And near the universities and the poor parts of town, they're stuck. And this is the, if you will, the most basic, most rudimentary form of voter suppression. It's what we've seen since 2000 is whether it's secretaries of state or whether it's county clerks, the folks who are running it in their county, it's become very politicized. And folks really making, in many cases, explicitly political decisions about where they even put these machines, who gets a few machines and long lines, who gets a lot of machines and no lines, trying to skew the outcome.
But then this whole idea that a commission will resolve these problems, after 2000, we had all of this legislation, Help America Vote Act, and things did not improve. Isn't part of the problem that in state after state, the electoral process is still controlled by supposedly in a bipartisan way, but by the parties rather than independent commissions that run our elections, as in many other countries?
Look, we have seen, again, the hyper-partisanization, if that's a word, of Secretary of State's offices, for instance, right? And very clear, people coming in with a real, partisan purpose in what should be a very kind of democratic small d mission. What we need, if the president's call does anything, what I would hope is it would inspire progressives across this country to think deeply and strategically about how they make an impact in improving the situation in their county, in their state. We tend to come on in the even years to turn folks off and then go to sleep in the odd years. And that's when the other side goes to work and they actually start changing the rules, changing the laws. Right now we have voter suppression legislation in several states. It increases, the number increases basically every day on us right now. And we've got to get back to understanding that we have to invest in making our process more fair every year, year in, year out.
I want to turn to a group called Project 21, comprised of prominent African-American conservatives trying to help scrap a key part of the Voting Rights Act part. That's Section 5, which mandates specific areas of the country with a history of racial discrimination when it comes to voting rights need to get federal approval before changing any of their voting procedures. Sherilyn Harley Laban, co-founder of Project 21, told The Guardian, quote, "Now we're in 2013 and the Voting Rights Act was something that came from a historical context. We need to update the law, and this part of it is no longer needed." Sherilyn Harley Laban is also a defender of voter ID laws. I want to go to a clip of that.
When Indiana passed its law, its voter ID law, Justice John Paul Stevens, and we would not by any stretch call him conservative, he said in a Supreme Court decision that the plaintiffs have failed to make the case that this voter ID law is going to be a hindrance or an impediment to anyone voting. And I might add, when the state of Georgia passed their voter ID law, we saw, in effect, the opposite of what the liberals and civil rights organizations allege. In the state of Georgia, we saw black voter participation increase after the state of Georgia passed their voter ID law. These two examples are in direct conflict with what people like Hillary Shelton of the NAACP argue, the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, ACLU, League of Voters. All of these groups allege that voter ID is going to be an impediment for people to go out and vote, minorities in particular, elderly, and that has just not been the case.
That's Sherilyn Harley Laban of Project 21 and Freedom Journal Magazine TV.
Yeah.
Ben Jones,
it's kind of hard
your
to take it
response.
seriously. This is the situation. She needs to actually get down in the weeds if she's going to talk about these issues. She was talking about Georgia, for instance. Georgia, because of our efforts, had to take, I think, 2 or 3 years to implement the law. What we were dealing with last year is they were trying to put it in place in a matter of months, some places weeks. And then, of course, the first race after was the 2008 elections, where black voter participation went up everywhere. In Shelby County, it's important that you know your history. Like, as you said, they say, oh, well, this was a historical problem. Actually, the state of Alabama's resistance to democracy has continued every decade, through the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, to today. For decades into the 80s, they resisted actually having districts that would let blacks be voted into local office in places across the state. They were forced through a series of lawsuits to ultimately open up their democracy to full participation. They then changed the boundaries of a number of cities through these annexations, 200 places throughout the state, and redistricted on that basis. So you'd come to Shelby County, and this place of cholera, where Mr. Montgomery, who's the lead plaintiff in Shelby versus Holder, this case is headed to the Supreme Court, one of only 2 blacks ever to serve on that city council, the only one at the time. Prior to the annexation, 79% black voter participation in his district. After the annexation, 29%. The federal government said to Alabama, don't hold races in these jurisdictions until you get back to a district that's fair, a process that's fair. They held it anyway, in violation of the federal order, and went ahead and put people in office based on rules and on lines the federal government said were not constitutional. And so we got to remember, we're dealing with Alabama. Alabama has been committed to resisting, if you will, federal direction in a way that empowers black people since Alabama has existed.
And talk about the importance of this. This case will be heard on February 27th in the Supreme Court on the ability of the government to continue to pre-clear these redistricting by localities that have a history of racial discrimination against minority voters.
So the issue here is whether or not the federal government will continue basically in the former Confederacy and in some places like the Bronx and Monterey County, California, where Latinos have been sort of similarly oppressed, to stop harm before it happens. This year, what that meant was that states like South Carolina weren't able to switch up their voting rules very quickly in order to cause mass confusion and exclude basically poor people who are disproportionately black and young from the ballot box. And what will happen if things go the wrong way is we will see the clocks turn back on our country very quickly. We'll see states like Alabama, we'll see states like Mississippi and Georgia and Texas able to very quickly exclude blacks, exclude Latinos from the voting process by whether it's, going to citywide, whether it's changing the boundaries, with whether it's packing people into districts, so you could have 3 black representatives, but you get 1, what have you. That's the concern here, is that this has been, we have states like Alabama that have consistently resisted democracy, consistently resisted the implications of the U.S. Constitution, who simply want to be empowered to have full control and be able to exclude blacks systematically from their democracy.
I wanted to turn for Fox for a minute. Hosts Brian Kilmeade and Martha McCallum and Bill Hemmer belittling the difficulties of Dessalene Victor, 102 years old, who endured hours to be able to vote in November. Let's go to that clip.
Voting reform. I mean,
who went? Oh, we wait on a long line. That's huge.
I could see them coming. Well,
but
it's true.
all it takes is manpower. Seems like something you could change at the municipal level. Well, get the town council on that one.
I wanted to come to the table with something
low hanging
fruit.
There.
Well, listen, that 102-year-old woman should not be on the line.
Well, I agree with you, but I mean, how long was she on line?
What's
the
big deal? What else is she doing?
What's
the
big deal? She was happy. She waited online. She voted. She was happy that she was there to vote. But I mean, this is such a non-issue.
They held her up as a victim.
Was she a victim of?
Staying alive right now.
Lashes on the bottom of her feet.
Fox News Radio.
Let's be clear, Ms. Victor is a hero. But it shouldn't have to be a heroic act to cast a ballot in the world's greatest democracy.